I've enjoyed all three projects from James Gunn's DCU, to a very high regard, mind you. Creature Commandos was exceptional, Superman is one of my favorite films of the year, and Peacemaker Season 2 exceeded my expectations, and brought me to emotional highs I didn't think the show could instill upon me. But with that said, as much as I've straight up loved all the projects coming out, I still have two giant issues with the universe that I just can't ignore. I'm not trying to be picky or make angry-fueled content. I'm simply a concerned fan that notices some major problems that could end up tanking James Gunn's take on DC. Something I really don't want to see happen. The first subject is quite straightforward, so straightforward that it doesn't warrant a whole video of its own, thus I'm lumping it into this one. To put it bluntly, I think the structure of how projects are coming out make no sense. I don't think I'll ever get over the decision to make Creature Commandos a hard R animated television show the beginning of the DCU instead of Superman. It was such a baffling choice for Gunn to make, and look, I love my R-rated comic book fun. But so far, 2 out of the 3 of the projects have been R-rated. And Peacemaker just set up one of the biggest plot points going forward in the DCU. Luckily, Gunn has stated that you won't need to watch Peacemaker Season 2 in order to understand the Salvation plotline. But it's odd nonetheless to introduce such an integral storyline in an R-rated TV show. On top of that, the projects he's chosen to make for his first phase of DC is odd too, going for extremely obscure characters to headline most of the titles. I love obscure and lesser known characters, and they have their place. But this first phase really needed to focus more on the bigger names in the DC universe instead of a solo Clayface movie or The Authority and Sergeant Rock. Characters I do enjoy and would love to see on the big screen, but it's still an odd choice to push those types of characters in the center of this new universe rather than the recognizable names. And you know, speaking of this new universe, there lies my biggest issue with these projects so far. The continuity to the DCU makes no damn sense. This is supposed to be a new universe, but so much of it has been tied to the late DCEU. And that's gonna hurt this universe so much if they don't start making a clearer distinction between the two. Most audience members barely know the difference between DC and Marvel, let alone the DCU and the DCEU. And even hardcore fans like myself that keep up with all the corporate BS are having a hard time getting on board with the continuity of this new take on DC, because it's so connected to something that should be left in the past. And Peacemaker Season 2 is the most glaring example of this. Creature Commandos was very connected to the Suicide Squad, but Peacemaker Season 2 takes it to another level. Having the first season set in the DCEU and the second set in the DCU, with all the history of the characters being the same except for the Justice League gag. When I watched that opening, I was honestly in shock at how blunt that was, and I was like, okay, I guess we're just moving on then. But the whole season revolves around Chris going to another universe. And the whole time, all the way up to the end, all I kept thinking was how a few simple decisions could have been made and that the Earth X we saw could have just been traded for the DCU. And make the explanation that the same Chris we know and love is now in this new universe. And look, I'll get into how that could have worked in a second, but I really want to make an important example of how stupid this decision is to make 2 seasons of a show set in 2 different timelines. Just real quick. Recently, Daredevil Born Again, a show that seemed to be a revival of the original Netflix series Daredevil, had to almost completely start production from scratch halfway through filming, because Marvel Studios made probably its dumbest decision ever to completely reboot the series and say the other show took place in a different timeline. But they intended to use the same 2 lead actors. It was such a stupid decision that everyone, including Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio, hated it. The backlash was so bad, Marvel backtracked and made the original show still a part of the MCU and kept the characters' backstories intact. Now, there's an obvious reason to why their original plan for Born Again was so idiotic. If you're a casual member who doesn't understand corporate egos, and you go to watch the new season of that show you really liked from a few years back, and as you're watching, you start to realize that they are actively ignoring plotlines, story beats, and characters, you'll get frustrated and confused and just turn it off. And more importantly, if you're a true fan who keeps up with all of the behind the scenes politics, you're pissed. Why? Because even though Charlie Cox is playing Daredevil and Vincent D'Onofrio is playing Kingpin, they are not the characters you know and love. They are completely different people. And that was what was going through my head this whole season, that these aren't the same characters. They might have 99% of the same backstory, but they are still not the same characters who are in a completely different world. They are different people, and to me it felt so distracting and odd, especially given the context of the type of story they are telling this season. So let's get into it. The one big change that could have fixed this whole DCU continuity confusion in Peacemaker Season 2. First off, like stated earlier, keep the characters the same. That means the show actually takes place in the DCEU. The first episode is basically the same. Chris stumbles upon his doppelganger, but this variant of his is the one from the DCU, and the same accidental killing occurs. And when Chris inevitably goes to the DCU, his father and Keith are still kind people and just get rid of all the Nazi shit. But this is the DCU, and things are still different here. And basically the whole season is the same plot. Rick Flag Sr. is trying to find a reason to get back at Peacemaker for killing his son. They find out about the interdimensional portal by just keeping him on some watch list, just like in the current season. All the characters in the 11th Street Kids go through the same arcs, with them all struggling to be who other people want them to be. And we'll get back to that in a second. But my point is, everything about the season so far is the same, except for one thing: the Salvation storyline. Cut it. Something that big shouldn't be introduced and set up in a TV show. Save that for Man of Tomorrow. This has been such a huge criticism of Marvel lately, making their audience rely too much on the Disney Plus shows to understand the movies. But to get back to the 11th Street Kids and how the season would wrap up, it's almost the same. They decide, fuck it, we're all gonna do our own thing and we're gonna use that money from Adrian to change lives. But here's the big difference. They decide there's nothing left for them here. Ads broke up with her girlfriend. Economos has burned every bridge with Argus trying to help Chris. Hardcore only has horrible memories here, and Vigilante is Vigilante. So he'll do whatever his friends do. Plus, he hates his mom. So they all go to the DCU and set up Checkmate in a world where they feel like they can actually make a difference. In a universe more fantastical, less dark, and most importantly, more hopeful than the DCEU. They leave the dead universe of the DCEU and start a new life in the new wonderful universe Gunn is creating. And I already know what you're thinking. Well, everyone except Chris has a variant in this universe, right? Exactly. A really fun thing to explore in Season 3. And another small change would be that Keith and Chris's father would not know that he is actually from another universe this season. That would be another interesting aspect for the following season as well, bringing all the characters closer with yet another shared experience. With all that said, I thoroughly enjoyed this season, and so far the DCU as a whole, but constantly connecting it all back to the DCEU defeats the purpose of even doing a reboot in the first place, and only confuses all audiences. So hopefully it's something Gunn can get a better hold of going into the future, because I'm still wildly excited to see what comes next.